para que entre los que tengan que entrar. Bueno, pues entonces, ahora.
Por la mañana los de secretaría, sí.
No, no se lo pagan bien. Hombre, mientras que no estén ahí. Vale, entonces, a ver, en mi cuenta, share, quiero. Bien. Lo que tiene que aprender un profesor de la universidad, Antonio.
No, eso lo aprendes tú porque tú eres bueno en eso, si no, tienes que contratar a alguien.
No lo sé.
Madre mía, qué aprender. Si se le piden a uno, entonces vamos. Bueno,
La duda es, Antonio, mira aquí. Mira, eso es en el vivo, lo que está haciendo ahora.
Sí.
La cuestión es, pero fíjate, yo no quiero que esté ya grabado, porque si no, lo veo en vivo, en streaming, no, pero que no me suena retrasado. Que lo pongo aquí o lo pongo más corto.
No, yo creo que está bien.
¿No?
Sí.
Vale, que se vea...
Eso está bien porque los de la ESIL tampoco lo ponen tan cerca, ¿sabes?
Vale, pues
Los de la ASIL, que lo he visto yo.
Vale, pues entonces, esto ya está en vivo retransmitiendo. Me voy a conectar y tú hablas para...
¿Dónde hablo? ¿Allí al
Pues,
micro?
sí, te pones como si fuera, a pesar de que te da un minuto en conectarme, a ver lo que me sale, también para verlo yo.
¿Me pongo ya?
Sí, pero espérate, que me voy a conectar con el móvil y me voy a salir fuera.
Espérate, que está aquí ya. Buenos días, ¿qué tal? Y ya tengo la lista actualizada, ¿vale? Ok, vale, dime una cosa, tío. Están todas, ¿no? Sigue. ¿Qué va a venir a la familia de nosotros? Inés sabe con los carteles. Vale. Hay que, ahora cuando venga ella, os tengo que pedir un favor, porque la persona francesa la que viene a hablar a las 10 y media, hay que ir a recogerla a las 10 en el hotel, ¿vale? Vale, una persona de entrevista, está teniendo un cliente de la que y entonces me pedí por favor que la recojamos. Uno de nosotros tiene que estar en el hotel Cataluña a las 10 y traerla para acá con cierta rapidez para que no se atrase, porque siempre ella la tiene. ¿Qué tal? Buenos días, ¿qué hay? Muy bien. Hombre, ¿qué tal? ¿Qué tal? How you doing? Very well. I was in Granada for Really? Oh, yeah. Sí, dígame. Perfecto. Mira, le estoy diciendo a él que va a tener una cooperación a la gente. Background, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Right. Okay, another song.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Antonio. Fine. Just to play the streaming on the region and hoping that everything will be fine. But it's the first time that we will kind of do it, and Antonio, vamos a
bueno, cuando digo que calla, es que sí que venía todo. Vale, vale, vale. ¿Qué? Venga, vamos.
So I present tomorrow morning. I present tomorrow morning.
Yeah. You're speaking tomorrow. I was
The technology is
not too bad. Technical that we are doing everything at the time probably. And this is we are going to do thanks to you for your comments. ¿Sí ya? ¿Estamos, Antonio? Supongo que no hace falta el micro, que el sonido ambiente, lo que tú vas a oír, ¿no? Sí, hola, buenos días. ¿El micro no funciona? Sí, buenos días. Sí, buenos días. Hola, Antonio, ¿se me escucha? Hola, ¿me están oyendo? ¿Se me escucha, Antonio? ¿Estás oyéndolo bien? Sí, perfecto.
perfectamente.
Sana, ¿qué tal? Te agradezco por el día.
Aquí ya tenemos el primer.
Llego con una también, dame una a mí porque yo tengo 10 programas, ¿sabes? Gracias. Hola. Pero abonaste y te enseñan el trabajo, pues no sé, van a hacer. Perdona, Ana, que te he cortado. Te digo, Leonard y pero bueno, va a entender.
Vamos a llevar con la ahora tenemos que estar un poco pendiente de ser capaz de medio organizar esto. Bueno, esto lo vamos a cambiar.
¿Qué pasa?
Porque mira, tal y como está ya, yo puedo poner muy bien a los ponentes, pero donde está en esta posición no pilla bien aquello. Entonces lo vamos a mover ahí. Entonces, ayúdame. Sí, mira tú la cámara. Mira tú la cámara del portátil. La cámara. ¿Ves?
Eso no lo van a poder evitar.
¿El qué?
Ese reflejo no lo van a poder
No, el reflejo no me preocupa. El reflejo en la placa de luz se verá mejor. Sí, lo que estoy apagando la luz. Cuando ya apague la luz aquí se ve. Lo que está es muy lejos. Entonces, si lo ponemos aquí, vamos
Déjalo,
a...
Antonio, déjalo.
Antonio, que se va a quedar mejor. Solamente moverle una silla, hombre. Tendríamos esto de aquí a allí.
Como para mí ya está muy bien.
Es lo mismo, realmente. Venga. Es lo mismo.
¿Seguro? ¿Y ahora dónde cogemos?
¿Qué? ¿La toma de electricidad? Coge el portátil y ponlo en la silla. La electricidad ya hay otro cable. Lo que hay que tener cuidado es que la gente que pase por aquí, que no le den una patada. ¿Vas a mover la silla y todo?
Sí. De momento, esto es lo que voy a hacer.
Vale. Venga, pues perfecto.
Estamos en la silla.
Perfecto. Bien pensado. Aquí.
Ahí.
Y ahora, este lo vamos a poner aquí. Y como debe estar aquí... Sí, Antonio, mira la diferencia, ¿eh? Ya se ve. De hecho, puedo poner aquí algún ponente mejor, mucho mejor. Debe estar aquí para que tenga más cuidado. Y no le ponga patada. Y aparte de eso, también un poco que así hay... Vale. José Luis, ¿qué pasa? Mira, que no sé por qué, no al momento, pero no lo sé hacer todo. Y ya está emitiendo y todo. Te he mandado el iframe para que lo pongas en el insert. Esto está funcionando, lo hemos probado ya con mi teléfono, me ha salido fresco, está bien, todavía no sé si lo pones. Además, digo, tampoco, ahora me acababa de ver si alguien se conectaba en las que no pasando de un lado para otro y no se estaba hablando. Pero bueno, ¿vale?
Juan, ¿tú vas a ir a la sede?
Venga, muchísimas gracias, José Luis. Hasta luego.
Yo voy a ver, acá ahí mismo del salón.
Aquí. No.
¿Apagarlo?
Tiene una función. Muchas gracias. Ahora sí, está bien.
Mira la página bueno, trabaja aquí. Sí, si hablas de protección, ¿tú hablas de protección? Nada, ella se va a meter encantada. No,
Hola, ¿qué tal? Hola, ¿qué tal? Encantado de conocerte, hombre. ¿Qué pasa? Tenía muchas ganas de conocerte porque, en fin, con la recomendación de Ángel Rodrigo, tienes que ser un crack. ¿Qué tal? Sí, un crack. Habla de ti, sí. Y la verdad es que yo hace un montón, con esto hace un montón que no lo veo, ¿sabes? Él está bien, se encuentra bien, la familia bien. Sí. ¿Cuánto hace que terminaste? ¿Allí también? Ajá, muy bien.
La de la Universidad de Barcelona, la de Administración de Exteriores y la de Formación de la Casa.
Muy bien. la he leído en tu currículum, esto está fenomenal. ¿Eso sí lo has sido al máster también? ¿O?
Sí, yo creo que es máster.
Muy bien, muy bien. Oye, qué bien. Sí, sí. Muy bien, muy bien. Fenomenal. Sí, pero efectivamente, pero ahora eres joven, ya tienes que dar el do de pecho y es cuando hay que trabajar por lo que puedes y más. Pues había un montón de temas por aquí, ¿vale? Vamos viendo ahora, este paso es una pena porque es tu compañero de Pablo,
Pero Antonio, no critiques tú, que te podría pasar a la
pero yo qué sé, no sé. Y el caso es que yo fui con mucho cuidado para no caer.
Te fuiste.
Y entonces él se ve casi mierda, ¿no? Siempre lo que sea y bueno, finalmente lo va a hacer online, pero imagínate con todo se acaba todo por su parte, que eso, no poder estar. No es lo mismo.
Bueno, pero si podemos hacerlo así, ¿verdad? La verdad es que si lo hacemos así, y así con este formato lo puedes
Mira,
hacer.
por algo mío que podemos seguir pagando porque no puede salir.
De hecho, bueno, de hecho Estados Unidos ha recomendado ayuda petrolera a sus ciudadanos en España.
Bueno, pero es que su universidad tiene prohibido desde hace meses, no de ahora, cualquier viaje internacional, sea donde sea, fuera de Estados Unidos no se puede mover en absoluto. Claro, no puede y este es el centro de ciberseguridad, pero el ángulo de ciberespacio, pero bueno, es básicamente una sociedad colectiva y bueno, qué pena, que si lo hubiéramos tenido aquí, sí, exactamente.
Sí. De facto es que me he dejado la maleta allí. Sí, la verdad que sí. Pero bueno, ya está el Wikilog, ya con eso.
The lawsuit was able to keep the place for itself. they went out and the spread over the city. We kept and this is one of there is more than especially for family, we will talk about
Cuando salimos a
Es muy bonita. Pero va a significar
Se mete con ella, supongo que a la izquierda. Donde tú quieras.
No con los cables.
Sí, no, sí.
Grande Carlos. Buenos días. Hola, buenos días. Pues toma, siempre ahí al lado de María. Ya te lo conté ahí, cuando estaba. Sí. No te preocupes, no pasa. Sí, aquí a la derecha, parece. Y ya Nacho organiza un poco la venta. Cuando tenéis, María. Ya está, ahí está.
Good morning and welcome to our university, to this School of Law. It's a place of history and high places to celebrate this seminar, international seminar, to learn and discuss about one of the issues most important that affect our digital security, cybersecurity. As General Secretary of this university, it is official to me, for me, to be here, on behalf of the rectora of this university, Pilar Aranda Ramirez. She would like to stay here, to be here with us, but other regulations do not allow her to be with us. So this gives me the rich opportunity not only to inaugurate this conference, but to do it in this faculty of law, to which I belong as a professor. So I'm very happy to stay here among good colleagues. First of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Maria Roldán, who is the director of the Department of Public International Law and International Relations in this faculty. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you. It's my pleasure to share this table, this opening ceremony with two distinguished authorities from our university and our faculty, distinguished authorities, distinguished lawyers, distinguished friends. And to take part in this opening ceremony, this magnificent international conference on the global challenges of cybersecurity. This conference comes from a national project of research awarded by the state that is conducted, that is pushed, that is funded by Dr. Antonio Segura, about the international legal aspects of cybersecurity. As the director of the Department of Public International Law and International Relations, it's my pride, it's my pleasure, it's my honor to take part and to speak about this magnificent event, and to thank and to congratulate Mr. Professor Antonio Segura, because it has helped to enrich, to increase the prestige of the academic faculty of our department. He is himself a recognized expert in this subject. He's not the only one in our department. And in this way, with the cooperation, the attendance of some other members of our department, the department will be great. The subject of this conference is not theoretical, it's not abstract and merely intellectual, but it's a very practical, very important, very decisive for our future, for our careers, for our well-being. This is it questions the role of the state, the role of the international relation, the governance of the cyberspace, kind of common heritage of mankind without borders. But as a matter of fact, the sovereignty of the state is at stake. And in this way, the physical and the digital fields are very interconnected, and the public sector and the private and the public sectors are also very interconnected. So the conference raises some important issues about the use of force and self-defense, the arms control, the use of misinformation as a tool of war, the attribution of responsibility, that is one of the main subjects of our challenge, the confusion, the blend of the different actors, state and non-state actors. So on behalf of the department, shortly I want to thank again my dear friend, my dear colleague, Professor Antonio Segura, and to underline and to appreciate also the important support given by our team, by our faculty, and also, of course, by the Unity of Excellence, the Research Excellency Unit, Digital Society, Security and Protection of Rights, very well conducted, very well handled by Professor Fernando Esteban de la Rosa. That is the main the main focus of interdisciplinary research in our faculty, and I think it deserves to be recognized and to be appreciated. So I wish and I foresee good results, fruitful speeches, fruitful debates in this conference. I'm sure that it will be like that. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to give the floor to José Luis Pérez Serrano, the dean of this faculty, and professor, of course, of this faculty. Please, I thought
Muchas gracias. Voy a intervenir brevísimamente para dar la bienvenida a esta facultad. Lo haré en lengua castellana, no por estar en una universidad española solo, sino por la dificultad que supondría para mí hacerlo en otra lengua y mucha más dificultad para ustedes, claro, entender. Yo quiero darles el saludo de la Facultad de Derecho, una Facultad de Derecho viva, una Facultad de Derecho activa, que hoy acoge esta reunión, esta conferencia, este congreso, que está organizado por un grupo de investigación, de los muchos grupos de investigación productivos que existen en la facultad, en relación íntima con un departamento, el Departamento de Derecho Internacional Público y Relaciones Internacionales, que es un referente a nivel internacional de lo que se trabaja, de lo que se rinde y de lo que se hace en esta facultad y en esta Universidad de Granada. Y la relación entre el grupo y el departamento, entre los grupos y los departamentos, acaba de señalar el señor director del Departamento de Derecho Internacional, la relación con otros departamentos, es lo que hace este acto también que considera la facultad como un acto propio, porque no son entidades aisladas los grupos de investigación, no son entidades aisladas los departamentos, sino que todos conforman una unidad de docencia, una unidad de investigación, como es esta facultad de Derecho, en la que la actividad investigadora es notable, nuestra situación en los rankings es alta, como dice la señora rectora, sobre todo me interesa, hay que citarlo, y ciertamente que esa actividad investigadora se proyecta no solamente en los investigadores, en los docentes, sino también en nuestros destinatarios finales, los estudiantes, que también se van a enriquecer directa o indirectamente de este congreso. Yo por eso quiero sencillamente agradecer que esté celebrando el congreso en esta facultad, donde debe ser, felicitar al profesor Segura, felicitar al grupo de investigación, al Departamento de Derecho Internacional Público y a los que disfruten de este magnífico edificio, de este jardín que nos da la bienvenida y que ya se ha abierto, una de las aspiraciones del profesor Roldán que hemos logrado conseguir, que disfruten directa o indirectamente de la ciudad de Granada. Y decía la señora secretaria general en su intervención que era un orgullo para ella y una alegría, una satisfacción presidir un acto en su facultad. Para esto yo creo que es incluso mayor para la facultad la alegría, la satisfacción de saber que algunos de nuestros docentes e investigadores, en el caso concreto, hablo de ella, ocupan cargos de responsabilidad en esta universidad. Hoy precisamente creo que deberíamos de alegrarnos y agradecerle públicamente al equipo rectoral y a la señora secretaria general, representándonos en este momento, el esfuerzo que ha hecho durante tanto tiempo por lograr que la facultad, la universidad, vuelva a ser la universidad que es. Se hace una labor callada, una labor no siempre muy reconocida, a veces con sobresaltos, y casi en unos días la universidad será nuestro problema, entonces lo que existirá va a ser una universidad presencial. Es una satisfacción para la facultad, un orgullo para mí representarla siempre y más en este acto, darles a todos la bienvenida, darles la enhorabuena y agradecerles de nuevo su presencia a la autoridad.
Thank you very much, Professor Cerrona, for your generosity in your work. So, that's the brief Professor Cerrona has said complete. This seminar is celebrate this seminar at the university that is among the best in the world. For second year, the ranking is high, places us to the 300 among best universities. And this is possible thanks to the continuous work of our broad research groups and units of excellence. From the course of our researchers and teaching staff. I would like to say that today we are witness of a clear example of the research of excellence. The celebration of a seminar like this gets supported by the enormous effort to achieve reach results. And the most important is that this effort is always made with enthusiasm and rigor to reach innovative solutions to the present and future problems, some of them still unknown, but all of them affect our digital society. I would like to thank Dr. Antonio Segura, director of this meeting, also Antonio Sanchez, the coordinator, for the organizers of this seminar. Within the framework of the research project, the challenge of global cybersecurity from an international legal perspective, for which Dr. Segura is responsible. May I add that this project is obtained by agency, the National Research Agency of Spain, and it's not easy to obtain. So this is a proof of the excellence of your work. Thank you very much for this. Cybersecurity is one of the topics of interest of governments, companies, citizens, and with the passage of the time, it has increased. This seminar will discuss cross-cutting issues, such as use of force, responsibility, and we'll discuss responses to the systems treat of the web from cyber diplomacy to cyber espionage. For 2 days, we will be brainstorming on this topic, the challenge of global cybersecurity. On this project object, you will benefit from the knowledge from the best experts of their fields. So, I would like to give them a special welcome to our university, to our city. Thank you very much for your availability. Being here today is a sign of hope for recovering our complete normality in our academic activities. In these times of health crisis that unfortunately continues between us. But our university continues to be a face-to-face university, especially among the professors that come from different universities. And here is present University of Illinois, Sheffield, Frankfurt, Pompeu Fabra, other center of research. I think it's Institute Max Planck also, and others. So thank you very much for participating to this seminar. Maybe the essential question now in this conference is not whether or not we will receive cyber attacks, but when we will receive them. And we must be able to balance the action through prevention, detection, and mitigation of the menace. I would like to thank Professor Felix Serrano for your hospitality and for generating synergies between different research groups. I also thank to our unique experts for the support of this Congress and another activities in this faculty and in another faculty. So thank you very much. Here is the responsible one, the responsible Professor Fernando Esteban Velas. And of course, many thanks, Professor Segura, for your dedication and commitment to high standard research. Of course, many thanks all of you who attend this seminar. I congratulate you for your choice, and I'm sure you will not be disappointed, and we'll learn a lot, learn a little more, but in any case, you will learn by from the best expert in this subject. So, many thanks, and on behalf of the Rector of the University of Granada, the International Conference, the Challenge of Global Cybersecurity, is inaugurated. Thank you very much.
Good morning to everyone, and welcome to all of you, participants, attendees, people following us online. It is a pleasure for me to be here today. It's been difficult, of course, to organize this international conference, but we will do our best in order to develop this activity with normality, as the Dean and the Secretary General and the Director of the Department said already. By the way, thank all of them for being here today. Well, we are going to proceed right away in order not to fall behind the schedule. And so now I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Zagurias. He is one of the leading experts in the field of cybersecurity. He's going to speak today about the problem of attribution, which is center stage right now in the field. I'm going to be very brief in order to introduce him, because as you can imagine, his CV is very long, and we may say that he is a member of the editorial boards of many journals, including the Journal of Conflict and Security Law, published by Oxford. He has held various positions within his university, the University of Sheffield. For example, he's been director of research. He's been also director of the Center for International and European Law. He has been visiting professor at various universities, for example, Paris, Union, Sweden, the US Naval War College, and Leiden. He has published many books as author and as editor as well. One of the main products of his work is, for example, the research handbook on international law on cyberspace that I'm sure you know very well. It's a must among the experts in the field. And of course, he has also published within the most important international and European journals in the field. For example, the European Journal of International Law, the Heidelberg Journal of International Law, the German Yearbook of International Law, and I may go on and on. As I said, I want to be brief. I just want to hear what he has to say, which is very interesting. And so, Professor Zagurias, welcome, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Antonio. Thank you for this very generous introduction. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So I want to thank you again for the invitation and for organizing this very interesting conference under very difficult circumstances. I was not able to travel to Granada, but pleased to join virtually, and of course I will follow the conference online. So I was asked to present on cybersecurity and the problem of attribution. So my presentation will be around 35 minutes. We'll focus on the challenges facing attribution cyberspace, and more specifically, it will focus on certain normative and factual challenges which have plagued the discussion of cybersecurity. However, I will also make some general observations about the current state of cyber attribution and how the research effort can move forward. It describes the process of assigning an attribution to the source. According to conventional wisdom, attribution in cyberspace is a problem, leading certain commentators to say that attribution is perhaps the most difficult problem in cyberspace. The first reason has to do with the architecture of cyberspace, and more specifically, its interconnected and borderless nature. Another reason is the structural availability of data and the availability cyberspace affords its users. That having been said, things are changing. Attribution is currently central to the cyber discourse unfolding between and among states and private actors. Initially, attribution was performed by the private sector. I want to mention in this respect the 2013 Media APT1 report, which named particular individuals working for the Chinese military involved in cyber theft. This was a groundbreaking moment for attribution. The following year, CrowdStrike published a report on the Puto-Anger threat actor. In the introduction to the report, it was written that through widespread espionage campaigns, Chinese threat actors are targeting companies and governments in every part of the globe. We believe that organizations, be they governments or corporations, global or domestic, must keep up the pressure and hold China accountable until lasting change is achieved. As expected, China denied any involvement. It said in a statement, the Chinese government, the Chinese military, and the relevant personnel have never engaged or participated in cyber theft or trade secrets. From private sector attribution, we have now moved to state-to-state attribution, in that states individually or collectively attribute malicious cyber operations to other states. The first public interstate attribution took place in 2014, when the US attributed the Soviet attacks in North Korea. But since then, the number of public attributions has increased. According to a survey conducted by Georgia Tech, between 2007 and 2014, that is within 7 years, there were 7 cases of interstate attribution, whereas between 2014 and 2018, that is within 5 years, there were 15 cases. Nowadays, the number is even higher. For example, the US attributed the hacks to the Democratic National Committee during the 2016 special election to Russia. The UK partners attributed hacks to research and development labs during the COVID pandemic to Russia and China. And the US attributed the sort of links acting to Russia's foreign intelligence service. It goes without saying that such attribution claims have been rejected by the two states. What we have witnessed then is that in a relatively short period of time, the number of attribution claims has increased and that there is greater willingness by governments to publicly attribute cyber attacks. There is also more coordination between governments, but also between governments in the public sector when attributing cyber attacks. And again, there is pressure to release the evidence behind an attribution claim. However, whereas private sector reports are more detailed as far as technical evidence is concerned, states, in most cases, do not provide such information or rely on private sector reports. What also transpires from this short exposition is that attribution is not a monolithic process. It is instead a multifaceted and interactive process involving various actors, domains, determinants, and techniques. In an article published in 2012, I described the threefold dimension of attribution as technical, political, and legal. Technical attribution is about the forensic investigation of a malicious incident to the origins of an attack platform, and it is associated with tooling and infrastructure. There have been significant developments in technical attribution, with states and the private sector developing sophisticated attribution technology and techniques. However, technical attribution is not adequate to identify the person behind the attack and terminates with the state. Political attribution is about the political determination of who did it in the form of a state or an individual linked to a state, and is based on political analysis, assessment, and judgment. As a report of the Director of National Intelligence into the 2016 Russian interference in the US election put it, an assessment of attribution usually is not a single statement of who conducted an operation, but rather a series of judgments that describe whether it was an isolated incident, who was the likely perpetrator, that perpetrator's possible motivations, and whether a foreign government had a role in ordering or leading the operation. Political attribution is performed by the executive branch of the government or by political institutions in general, and underwrites political decisions attribution is about the legal determination of who did it on the basis of legal criteria in order to ascribe legal consequences. For example, on the basis of legal attribution, the state may be held legally responsible for a cyber attack, and the attack state can take lawful action against the responsible state, for example, countermeasures. This does not mean that these processes are mutually exclusive. Instead, they inform and support each other. For example, technical attribution fits into the political and legal attribution process because they both rely on evidence in order to make political or legal determinations. Also, political determinations of attribution need to comply with the legal standards of attribution if a state wishes to use the remedies offered by international law. I will now discuss the international law determinants of cyber attribution and the challenges that exist. But before I do this, it is important to explain the role of attribution in international law and in the law of state responsibility, more specifically. As we know, international law as a governance tool is ontologically and functionally dependent on states. States are the main subject of international law and the main bearers of rights and obligations. States are, however, inanimate entities which act through physical persons. As a permanent court of international justice, applying its advisory opinion on German settings in Poland, states can act only by and through their agents and representatives. Attribution in international law subjectivizes an act, in that it transforms a private act into an act of the subject of international law, in this case, a state. In doing so, attribution triggers the application of international law. Second, and following from this, attribution is a constitutive element of the law of state responsibility. This is because attribution is closely linked to responsibility. If an act is attributed to an entity, the next question is whether that entity has any responsibility for the act, if the act, for example, causes harm. This is so important in this, but also ignored, where responsibility is centered to the international legal system. According to the law of state responsibility, a wrongful act is first to be attributed to a state, that is the subject of international law obligations, and engages responsibility only if it constitutes a violation of one of its obligations. With no attribution to a state, there is no state responsibility. Third, attribution in international law is a normative process. It is a normative process because its scope depends on international law's normative reach as far as subjects are concerned. It is therefore states and international organizations to whom acts can be attributed and be held responsible, but not individuals. It is also a normative process because whether an act is attributed to the state depends on the international law criteria of attribution. That having been said, facts play a role in support of such normative determination. Turning now to the international law attribution criteria, there are three broadly defined attribution determinants. The first determinant is the institutional one. It covers the state's de jure and de facto organs. The jure state organs are those that are defined as such by state law. The army, for example, is a de jure state organ. Consequently, malicious act operations executed by armed officers will be automatically attributed to the state. Similarly, a hacking group incorporated into the state apparatus, for example, the army, becomes a de jure organ whose acts will be attributed to that state. This will apply, for example, to the Estonian Defense League or Unit 6138 of the PLA, People's Liberation Army. Similarly, the hacks of the 12 Russians indicted for the EMC hacking of will be attributed to Russia because they were GRU officers. De facto organs are state-assuming entities. In the Nicaragua case, the SJ spoke of complete independence and control, whereas in the Bosnian genocide case, the SJ spoke of strict control or a great degree of control. Possibly, a group of hackers created by a state to perform state functions and operate under the control of that state, but not incorporated within the state apparatus, is a de facto organ, unless there is some margin of independence in decision making. The second determinant is functional and includes situations where an entity is empowered by a state to exercise governmental authority. The delegation of authority in this case should be specific and should involve functions whose performance requires special state powers. For instance, if a company takes offensive cyber defense action in order to protect its property, this act will not be attributed to the state, even if the company acts on the basis of a named legislation, because such action does not involve governmental functions. The delegation of authority is not specific. The third determinant refers to agency and includes situations where a state instructs or directs a person to commit a malicious cyber attack, or when a state exercises control over the malicious act. Instructions, in order to lead to attribution, should be given in relation to a specific act and need to be carried out as such by those instructed. Direction means guidance, short of instructions, although international jurisprudence is quite thin in this respect. Regarding the criterion of control, the international legal discourse seems to be divided between effective and over control. The effective control test requires indispensable input in the commission of the malicious act. According to the over control test, all the acts of an organized group will be attributed to the state if that state equips, finances, coordinates, or helps the group in the general plan of its activities. According to the SJ, the effective control standard should apply in the law of state responsibility, although the court recognizes that different standards of control will apply in different areas of international law. Now, applying the Article 8 test to the PNC action, according to the report by the Director of National Intelligence, Russia's President Vladimir Putin ordered the campaign to influence the US elections. This involves the attribution standard of instructions. However, in the case at hand, ordering a campaign to influence elections, the US election, does not amount to specific instructions addressed to particular persons, and moreover, it does not in itself amount to instructions to commit unlawful acts. Consequently, related activities cannot be attributed to Russia on the basis of Article 8 in a similar way that the DDoS attacks in Estonia by patriotic hackers do not be attributed to Russia. Also, according to the US government, the Lazarus Group is controlled by North Korea, but this is not equivalent to effective control for attribution purposes. Another method of attributing malicious cyber attacks to the state is when a state acknowledges and adopts the particular attack as its own. Approval transforms the act into a state act, but the approval needs to come from the highest levels of government and should be clear and unequivocal. This is that the attribution by undisclosed officials for the Stuxnet attack to Israel or the US does not satisfy this criterion. What the preceding exposition demonstrates is that the attribution criteria do not be fulfilled easily in cyberspace, and this leads to responsibility gaps. The difficulties surrounding the normative standards of attribution are compounded by evidentiary difficulties, because, as I said earlier, although legal attribution is normative, it is also fact-dependent. The primary evidence is technical, such as malware samples, scripts, and programs used in data networks or host networks, IP addresses, command control, domain names, registration information for infrastructure, payment information for infrastructure. To this documentary evidence, such as cyber strategies, legislation, official reports, or reports with independent bodies such as think tanks, NGOs, press reports, as well as intelligence reports, will be taken into consideration. However, such evidence may not be available only for computation. It is not only the type of evidence, but its cooperative value that is also critical. In international law, there is no uniform standard. The different standards may apply depending on the crowd of the section. However, applying a high standard may affect the ability of states to execute, although it can enhance the reliability of execution, whereas applying a lower standard enhances the ability to execute, but may decrease the reliability of execution. As I have also said, in most cases, accused states have rejected execution claims for lack of evidence or for unreliable evidence. By disputing the factual basis of execution, these states also dispute the political or the possible legal claims attached to execution. It thus transpires that the normative and factual difficulties surrounding self-execution diminish the role of international law as the governance tool in cyberspace. So, what should be done? Now, one proposal is to establish an attribution agency in order to depoliticize, streamline, and regularize the attribution process. Such an agency can be intergovernmental or have private-public membership. The legitimacy and effectiveness of such an agency will depend on its composition, mandate, and methodology. If states consent to such an agency, this can ensure the cooperation and enhance its legitimacy and effectiveness. The states may still put forward an action security or other justifications to limit the scope of their cooperation. The agency may also face jurisdictional immunity because it may need to extend its investigations into other states' networks or private networks by private companies. The time frame within which such an agency can conclude with its investigations is also important. If it takes too long, states will ignore it, since action often is swift. How the agency will be resourced is another issue of contention. Will states provide it with the necessary resources to know how? Should investigation be delegated to other agencies, such as private companies? Moreover, if the findings of such an agency are not binding, but are consultative in nature, the contribution of such an agency to the settlement of cyber execution disputes will be minimal. However, there is a potential to aggravate such disputes if parties use agency's findings to reinforce their own claims. If its findings are binding, the question is how they can be verified, whether receiving states will review them. This leads to another issue, which is the accountability of such states. For example, will it be held accountable for wrong attributions? We may also want to revisit the attribution criteria for purposes of cyber attribution. As I said, the SJ took a rather pragmatic approach. They say that attribution will differ in the different legal regimes that it applies. It is true that the existing criteria were developed in an era where non-state actors, in particular armed groups, were created by states to fight their wars, and these groups were dependent on states for material resources and direction. However, currently, many non-state actors operating in cyberspace are self-sufficient, whereas their relations with states can vary from attachment, relative detachment. They can be vertical or horizontal, continuous or ad hoc. One response to the actions of non-state actors is to attach responsibility to them as independent legal persons. But this would require a radical overhaul of the international legal system. Another response is to attach responsibility to states for their acts without attribution. But this is not on the international law's agenda. The obligation of due diligence, for which Karine will speak later, circumvents attribution, but also changes the nature of responsibility. In my opinion, the attribution criteria should capture the most subtle modes of interaction between states and non-state actors in cyberspace. Now, the overcontrol database is careful in this respect because it takes a more holistic approach to the relationship between states and non-state actors. Such relationship can be financial, organizational, material, or political. Moreover, under the overcontrol test, all the acts of the group will be attributed to the state without needing to do what the state's effective control over any particular act. If we apply the overcontrol criterion, Stuxnet we attribute to Israel or to the US or to both if evidence of organizational support can be found. As a matter of fact, Stuxnet or sophisticated attacks in general require resources, know-how, and intelligence information. The overcontrol criterion can also capture cyber exploitation operations by Chinese private-owned enterprises in view of the financial, material, and organizational support received from the Chinese government. In this regard, I want to stress that the overcontrol is not only a criterion for the classification of conflict, but also an attribution criterion as a commentary to the second declaration makes clear. Moreover, Article 8 of the Arms of Cibersecurity does not qualify in any way the requisite standard of control, but as a commentary to this article notes, this standard should apply with flexibility. There is also evidence that the states will apply different control tests to cyber operations. For example, Harold Hope, the former legal advisor of the US Department of State, spoke of sufficient degree of control as a threshold for holding states responsible for cyber operations. Furthermore, we should also recognize that non-state actors may act in support of a particular state's policy out of a sense of allegiance. In this case, an alignment between a state and a non-state actor is formed, which can lead to execution if the non-state actor manifestly acts in pursuance of the state policies, and the reference state implicitly or explicitly accepts the state of affairs. Patriotic actors fall within this scenario. Patriotic actors are individuals or groups who apparently act on their own initiative against a perceived enemy of the state, to which they bow their allegiance, and their actions at time coincide with the particular cause pursued by that state. Patriotic actors are not dependent on the state, whereas the state's overall income is below the overall control standard. A state may provide encouragement, mobilizing, guidance for citizenry, condone their actions, but it does not organize their attacks or provide training or equipment. One could say then that the state exercises self-control over them on the basis of political, religious, cultural, or other alignment. Moving now to another attribution determinant, I said previously that instructions according to established law should be explicit and specific, but states do not issue explicit and specific instructions. Instead, in most cases, instructions are implicit. To give an example, President Putin stated in response to criticism vented against Russia that if they, meaning the hackers, are feeling patriotic, they will start contributing as a relief to the justified fight against those speaking evil of Russia. In my opinion, if attacks follow, they can be attributed to Russia as being destructive. In order to do this, one can take into consideration governmental communications or statements, the type of attacks and their targets, the tempo of attacks, the timing, or the beginning and end of such attacks. Now, in relation to evidence and standard of proof, a lower standard can help in making attribution. The preponderance of the evidence is an appropriate standard, in my opinion, because it facilitates attribution by providing good scrutiny of which recognizes also that evidence is not always easy, and that determinations are never absolutely certain. Now, all these recommendations will, of course, materialize if states agree to create such an agency or to revise the attribution criteria and the standard of proof. Now, are states ready to do so? I doubt they are, and the reasons are many. First, states treat attribution as a sovereign prerogative and feel that they do not have an obligation to review their evidence. States, in other words, want to maintain their power to decide whether and where to attribute, whether to attribute publicly or privately, and what will be attributed and to whom. States also want to maintain the freedom to decide on what follow-up action they will take following attribution. If they attribute a malicious act to another state, there is the expectation, at least within domestic policies, that some kind of action will be taken. Also, states have asymmetric cyber capabilities, with some states having very sophisticated and robust attribution technologies and mechanisms. As they see no benefit in having an organization performing attribution on their behalf, there are no benefits in sharing the attribution technology. In the current geopolitical environment, characterized by state antagonism, attribution is also used to pursue strategic goals such as prevention or deterrence or other more specific political, military, or economic aims. Finally, strict attribution criteria allow states to maintain plausible deniability for their policy acts and shield states from responsibility, although it should be said that the same criteria may also be used by adversaries. All in all, I can say that having attribution claims are essentially political, and attribution is what states make of it, and not what the law makes of it. This is also in line with the general reticence of states to agree on clear-cut rules of cyberspace, and the fact that they continue to dispute the content and scope of application of existing rules to cyberspace. Moreover, attribution has become an independent variable. It has become a means of gauging state behavior in cyberspace by naming and shaming. That having been said, I do not, however, want to close my presentation with such a pessimistic view about the role and place of international law in cyber attribution. I will thus conclude by saying a few words of how the international law research agenda regarding attribution can move forward. I believe that as researchers, we need to take a pragmatic approach and consider how we can configure the law of attribution in order to maintain international equality in cyberspace. This might include exploring questions like what will make attribution effective in triggering the law of cybersecurity, what evidence and standard proof enforce the confidence in attribution, what international law procedures and institutions enforce the confidence in attribution. But in order for this research agenda to yield results, it is important to engage with policymakers and with technologists in order to understand the process of attribution, and in particular how state models attribution and what variables they take into consideration, including the place and role of international law when making attribution claims. In addition, and this is my final words, this may also require us to think outside the box. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sarubias, for your excellent presentation. So we are going to open the floor for questions. We very much hope to have a debate right now. So please go ahead if you want to
please raise your hand if you would like to ask. Russell, go ahead, please. Micro.
Russell, I think that you should go, sorry about that. I think that you should go close to the camera. Thank you very much, I'm sorry.
I take it by much,
Yes, you can.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Nicholas.
Here.
Yes, close to the Nico. The Nico is in the webcam.
In the webcam. Here.
Sorry about that.
Okay, sorry to be the first person to ask a question, being also from the University of Sheffield, but I was very pleased to hear you mention Article 11 of the Articles on State Responsibility, which is where attribution can be made where a state adopts and acknowledges the conduct of a non-state actor by itself. And I think this is a really important area in the context of attribution, but also under research, because establishing ex-ante control over a non-state actor is always going to be very difficult, especially if you require effective control, but even if you lower that standard to overall control, as you suggested. So it's often easier to look at what the state has done after that cyber attack has been conducted. For example, in the context of patriotic hackers. And you say that to establish attribution under Article 11 requires a high threshold, and I think that's probably right if you look to state practice. But would it not be easier to try to reformulate, reimagine, re-understand what constitutes acknowledge and adopt? So, for example, in the context of patriotic hackers, if patriotic hackers conduct cyber attacks and the state, the host state, does nothing, okay, it could be a breach of due diligence, but breach of due diligence is a failure to act, not responsibility for the act itself. But could you not say that the failure of the host state to respond to those patriotic hackers in some way amounts to acknowledgement and adoption, and thus leads to attribution? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it was, the examples are good. So your question is whether, in relation to Article 11, the adoption, and also in relation to non-state actors or actors, etc., the fact that the state fails to take action, etc., whether that will constitute adoption of the act by the state. It could, and also it could. It depends how you see the relation between states and non-state actors. What Article 11 tries to do is to kind of see ad hoc relations between state and a non-state actor. Whereas for all the other criteria, for example, the over control, etc., or control in general, they can take a more long-term view, continuous view between states and non-state actors. So sometimes it depends on the state. Of course, all these things depend also on the particular state, the political culture in a state. So there may be states that the relationship between states and the state, government and regional, is closer, and there are expectations, formed by the government that individuals will support the state in all its the manifestations of its power and support regions of the state. So in this regard, I would say that the control, and also Article 8 talks about control. It doesn't say effective or over, etc. There is a control by the state. The state may have political, ideological control over non-state actors or patriotic actors. So this criterion, in my opinion, can better capture this kind of relation between a state and a non-state actor. Whereas with regard to Article 11, it is more kind of ad hoc relationship, which of course is taken over by the state. So the problem here, and you see the hospital states, the adoption was the fact that the government, the Iranian government, continued the act, supported and continued the act. Whereas with patriotic actors, you may not have continuation in relation to the specific event. Of course, it can be another event where you can have continuation, but not in relation to the specific event. So I would like to see the relation between the state and patriotic actors in this kind of control, which then patriotic can capture any activity by patriotic actors, whereas in relation to Article 11, we have them ad hoc, and then it's a continuation of the same act by the state, which may not happen in relation to patriotic actors. Patriotic actors can attack someone else because of, a different kind of interest by the state.
Thank you very much. Next question. In the meantime, I have my own question. You have proposed in your presentation, Professor Zacharias, two solutions to the problem of attribution. Both of them have problems, as you said, but you seem to prefer the second one, the second part. The first one, to put in motion an attribution agency, an international one, you say it's problematic because, first of all, states are willing to give this power to an international institution, first of all. And the second one would be where to place this institution as well, how to fund it, etc. But given that the second part is not easy either, and that both involve kind of need to modify existing international law, wouldn't it be better to put the effort on this first plate in order to create an attribution agency, be placed, for example, at the UN, so to speak, because in the long run, that would be the best solution. It would be like having an international court. The court in The Hague was difficult to put in motion, but there it is. We have it, and it's very important to have an international institution in order to solve a very difficult question, which is this one about attribution. Thanks very much.
I take the view as well that international law applies and is enforced in a rather centralized way. For example, the whole law of services is centralized. There isn't, the essence of the law of services is the centralized application and enforcement of the law. And there is agreement on certain aspects or rules on state attribution, and that relates also to attribution, because the state interests converge. They understand that if we allow something to happen, yes, we can have the power to do it, but also our adversaries to do the same to us. So there is a kind of parity in their interests and then definitely in the law. So it you have a centralized institution, an agency, so under the UN, the issue there is that you can have cyber powers, and cyber powers, Estonia can be a cyber power, so it's not only the traditional notion of cyber power, that may not participate because they have the attribution mechanisms, they have the cyber technology, etc. So an institution like that would be more limited to states that may not have the cyber capabilities to perform attribution. Now, if that institution is only for those states, then the international legitimacy of the institution would be limited. And also the effectiveness of the institution. And with effectiveness, I mean that it needs to have the attribution mechanism. So who is going to provide the technology to perform attribution? Are they going to buy it from the private sector? Should they involve the private sector? And also there's the problem for me of scrutinizing their attribution determinations. They can make an attribution determination. Now, if the state that asks to have this attribution determination, because it doesn't have the capabilities, it will rely on that attribution determination without being able to scrutinize whether this is, a reliable, credible attribution determination. In order to increase the reliability, the institution should have the technology, but then the technology depends on someone else to provide it. So in this regard, I don't think that an centralized international agency at this stage will provide any address the challenges, problems, or provide any remedy. And the other issue for me, which is important, and that has also to do with the gradual development of international rules or consensus on international rules in this area, is that we have certain agencies, chemical weapons, fact-finding, like agencies. But these agencies operate within a specific legal regime, which has specific obligations for states, and then, of course, states accept that there should be some fact-finding, and they accept that there should be accept the findings of this fact-finding commission. But also there are problems. I mean, you see, the reactions of Russia to fact-finding in Syria, or what happened to the organization for the repression or proliferation of chemical weapons. So there are reactions, but it is within a specific legal regime to the states are concerned. Now, for cyberspace, we don't have this, clear regime of international law in cyberspace. So that agency will operate within either a legal vacuum or within legal assent. And although they make findings, those findings may have legal constancy. So there are questions, it may develop international law. But is it legitimate for that agency to develop international law in also within a context where the law is uncertain? So I believe that such an agency may create more problems, lead to more uncertainty, than solve the problems that exist nowadays in this area or in cyber innovation. So I would want to see states gradually through customary law, etc., developing clear understandings of how the rules apply. But in order to do that, there needs to be some kind of equality balance of interests of states within this area.
Thanks very much. Any other question? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Close as we come, whether to change.
Right. Well, sorry about that. Good morning. Just to make matters clear, just a follow-up question. So your contention is that the current doctrine of international attribution could be expanded or adapted and to create the appropriate legal mechanisms to ensure that state and non-state actors could be accountable and responsible according to international law. And basically you're arguing for preserving the decentralized mechanisms, however, improving state practice and going towards the creation of international customs. Is that so?
Yes. So the whole law of status was really decentralized, and also the law in general, the enforcement of international law is very decentralized. Of course, there are some judicial mechanisms, yes, but again, there's also a decentralized judicial regime in international law. So what I'm saying is that we need to see the specificities of certain states. We need to consider the relations between states and non-state actors. And also, one important thing is that the law of service has been developed on this kind of division between states or the public and the private. But as we see from domestic system, but also internationally, and particularly certain states, this kind of division between the two is not very clear, and non-state actors always complement state policies and act as, there's a word proxy. Proxy sometimes has a negative connotation, but it is, if I use it in more generic terms, non-state actors act on behalf of the state and for state purposes. So we see this, this context, we may need to reconsider how the existing criteria apply. And I would like to speak to this, should be specific, effective, or can be something else. I mean, control is control, and there can be gradations of control between states or layers of control between states and non-state actors, and also the type of control someone can exercise may differ. I mean, we can have ideological control. Even on the basis of ideological control, a non-state actor or an individual can act on behalf of the state. I don't want to mention examples, but I think anyone can have good examples of how ideology, religion, etc. can lead someone to act for a certain purpose pursued by the states. And so then states will contribute to this development. So it can be customary law, development of certain specific rules. And to tell you the truth, apart from judicial pronouncements, states are quite ready hesitant to say what kind of control would apply. And as I said, states may have different understandings of control, sufficient control, or any other kind of control. But I want to see some kind of movement, some kind of consensus, which then can constitute customer law. I doubt it will be treaty law, but at least there will be some practicing of the
Yeah, definitely so. I fully agree with you that, however, if we speak generally of the laws of attribution, how control has been interpreted by the ICJ, for example, from the Nicaragua case to the genocide, etc., has also gradually been, substantiated. And in the case of cyber attacks, if you think, for example, the 2014 Sony cyber attack, that would be quite an interesting case on seeing how state sponsorship definitely affects our attacks. Thank you very much for your intervention. It was very, very interesting, and I hope to be able to continue the conversation with you further on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zagurias. I know that Jerry has a question, but unfortunately we have to stick to the schedule, and we will leave it for a later discussion or meeting. Thank you very much, Professor Zagurias, for being with us today, even if online. We are very much hoping to have you here in Granada, Italy, very soon.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, we will have a little break of 5 minutes, and we will get back together with the next presentation. I see Karine already here. We are very much expecting her presentation. 5 minutes break, and we will be back. Thank you. Ya, pero aquí la gente no hay si esto de arriba no tenemos, pues pásate por la cafetería mientras grabamos. Muchísimas gracias. Tout va bien, les difficile d'organiser tout ça. Oui, c'est ce que j'ai fait, c'est ce que j'ai fait. Sí, mira, no me han llamado, ¿no? Ya.
Muchas gracias, Lola. Vale, venga, venga. Gracias, gracias, hasta luego.
Yes, I'm going to be here all no.
Tengo que cambiar esta cámara.
Espera un momento que viene Inés con el agua que he pedido. Pero no sé de las situaciones.
Okay, good morning again. we are going to proceed with the schedule. Now, it is a pleasure for me to introduce you Karin Vanelier-Christakis. As you will see, she is the leading expert on due diligence regarding cybersecurity, and we will benefit very much from her presentation today. Karin is Associate Professor in International Law at the University of Grenoble-Alpes. She's Deputy Director of the Grenoble-Alpes Cibersecurity Institute and Deputy Director of the Chair Legal and Regulatory Implications of Artificial Intelligence. She has published widely in the field of international law and cybersecurity, and she has been invited to present her work over 90 times in more than 20 countries. Her research focuses on the capacity of international law to adapt to new challenges of international security, in particular in cyberspace. She is interested in the role and responsibilities of state and private actors, and in particular on the issue of hackback and due diligence, cyber diligence, which was integrated in France's national cyber defense strategy. She has worked or has been consulted by the French government, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the OECD. So it is my pleasure again, as I said, to introduce you today to Karin, that will be speaking on the due diligence, the specifics of her presentation is due diligence, a core principle in the fight against ransomware and cybercrime. So please, Karin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And just a few words, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for this communication. And I know how difficult it is to organize such a conference in these circumstances. So I'm very happy today to be here to present you the question of due diligence and principle in the fight against ransomware and cybercrime. Responsible countries need to take action against criminals who conduct ransomware activities on their territory. Did Joe Biden swore during his meeting with President Putin on the date of Geneva in June of this year, spelled the end of an era. For how long will states be able to harden, to shelter cyber criminal groups and other malicious cyber activities with impunity? Indeed, over a small number of years, the digital universe has become a wide west, a space for confrontation, not only between states, but also between states and non-state actors whose destabilizing activities are a major concern for the international community. As the US Secretary General already pointed out 7 years ago, among the complex issues that have emerged is the growing malicious use of ICTs by extremist terrorists and organized criminal groups. So today, in 2021, ransomware reached the rock across the world and paralyzed critical infrastructures, as further evidenced by the recent colonial apartheid attack, or the alarming growth of cyber malicious acts aimed at the healthcare sector since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this burning context, where one crisis follows another, and where the fight against ransomware and cybercrime has become a priority in terms of national and international security, the issues of state compliance with due diligence in regard to criminal activities carried out from their territory, as well as that of their responsibility in cases of negligence, can no longer be postponed. Taking into consideration the time available in this presentation, I will not discuss all the issues and parameters of the application of due diligence principle into cyberspace. Instead, Instead, I will focus on some particularly challenging issues, and more precisely, I will address here 4 issues. So the first issue is concerning obligation of individuals in regard to state sovereignty in the cyberspace. Second issue is concerning the 4 cardinal principles. Point of due diligence is the fight against malicious activity in cybercrime, knowledge, capacity, risk, and damage. A third point, the third issue, will be about due diligence obligations, and the question whether the diligence imply obligation to act in order to prevent, prosecute, notify, and cooperate with the fight against cybercrime. And the first issue is concerning the problem of violation of due diligence with state responsibility, and the question to circumvent the major problem of attribution in cyberspace, which was already addressed by Nicolas Sagonas. So let's start now with the first issue, due diligence in regard to malicious activity and state sovereignty in cyberspace. Whether out of interest, cowardice, carelessness, or even ignorance, some states are proven to be a safe haven for criminal groups who develop ransomware and other malicious cyber tools in order to launch their own attacks or to monetize these tools at an incredibly high price in a very lucrative and unscrupulous market. Like fiscal paradise in the past, we are today observing the emergence of cyber havens, of cyber havens that are growing into the protected shadow of sovereign states. However, states' sovereignty should not reign with impunity. As we all know, while sovereignty is indeed a protected principle that confers on states the exclusive right to display the activity of the state on its own territory, sovereignty implies also a duty, the obligation to protect within the territory the right of other states, in particular their right to integrity and inviolability. And this obligation of states to ensure that their territory is not used to cause harm to other states, as we have seen many times over by international judges. Its most famous expression is endowed with the dictum of the International Court of Justice in the Gulf Channel cases in 1949, which states every state's obligation not to allow nor permit its territory to be used for acts contrary to the rights of other states. So, by virtue of their sovereignty, states must therefore show due diligence in regard to activities taking place on their territory or under their control. As you see here, keeper in pêche. This means he who can and does not prevent cease, which means that when you are aware of a crime and you can prevent it and yet do nothing, it is a sin. This famous quote by Antoine Loisel, 17th century Judge Council, now portraying in a list of customary movies of the Kingdom of France, sum up today what the principle of due diligence means in the 21st century with regard to sovereign state in the cyberspace. To act when they know and they can. In its 2015 report, the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts on Cybersecurity, the famous UNGGE, without specifically mentioning the principle of due diligence, made several mention of it. In particular, the UNGGE maintained first that state sovereignty and international norms and principles that full sovereignty apply to the conduct by state of ICT-related activities and to their jurisdiction over ICT infrastructure within their territory. Second, that states should seek to ensure that their territory is not used by non-state actors to commit international wanted acts using ICTs. And third, that they should not knowingly allow their territory to be used for international wanted acts using ICT. These implicit references to the principle of due diligence were reiterated practically word for word by the GDP in its most recent report adopted in May of this year. It is true that some states, in particular Israel and the United Kingdom, and to a lesser extent the United States, dispute the legally binding nature of the due diligence principle in the cyberspace. Israel, for example, considers that the principle of due diligence is only a voluntary non-binding norm of responsible state behavior in the cyberspace, and this for two main reasons. First, because according to Israel, cyberspace is, and I quote Israel, mostly private and decentralized, and as a consequence, states would not have the control or at least oversight over the harmful activity. And second reason, according to Israel, because there would be no practice grounded in some overarching units, which would be indispensable for a customary rule of due diligence or something similar to that performed in the cyberspace. In a similar way, as you can see, the UK considers that due diligence is a non-binding norm because there is, and I quote the UK, there is not yet state practice sufficient to establish a specific customary international law rule of due diligence applicable to activities in the cyberspace. So, to sum the reasoning of these two states, first, there is no general principle of due diligence in international law, and second, as a result, if you want to demonstrate that due diligence applies in the cyberspace, you have to prove the existence of specific customary rule in this field. And this is not the case because there is no state practice. While interesting, the reasoning is not totally convincing. Indeed, contrary to what they say, due diligence is not a principle that applies only in the field of international environmental law or only in very limited domains of international law. Indeed, there is today ample evidence that due diligence is a general principle of international law, which applies in all cases, all fields, and all activities. It is true that the principle of due diligence are often be disputed in relation to the prevention of environmental damages. However, it is very logical taking into consideration the risk of transitory environmental damage. But an examination of state practice, opinion rules, and case law is no possible doubt about the fact that due diligence goes well beyond environmental law and is applicable in all fields of international law. For instance, long before its proposal in the environmental domain, a whole series of arbitral awards had applied to due diligence principles to, for example, the protection of aliens and foreign states representatives. And it is of particular interest in relation to malicious cyber activities and cybercrime to recall that historically due diligence has its main impact on the responsibility of states for private actors, as shown, for example, by the Alabama case. When then in 1941, due diligence was famously applied for the first time in a case concerning transboundary pollution, the famous Trace case, the tribunal was just transposing in this field what he called, and I quote of international law. And a few years later, in its first decision on the merits in the court of China case, the ICJ applied due diligence in an entirely new domain. As you remember, Albania knew or should have been aware of the mines in its territorial waters, but failed to notify the UK warships of their presence. The ICJ then clearly stated that the obligation of every state to not allow knowing its territory to be used for acts contrary to the law of other states was the expression of a general and well-recognized principle of international law. I could continue with many other examples of application of the diligence principle in so many other fields of international law, and especially in the field of international security. And I could also recall in this respect the codification work of the IFC in relation with the prevention of transboundary harm from hazardous activities, where the IFC Commission insisted that, and I quote it, any activity which involves the risk of causing significant transboundary harm, any activity, is within the scope of the article. And the UN Commission refused them to drop the list of this activity, emphasizing that any such list could become quickly dated from time to time in the light of fast evolving technology. It is thus very difficult to understand why due diligence should be by a magic touch, excluded from the cyberspace. And I think it is also difficult to fully understand the UK position, which on one hand rejects due diligence, and on the same time said, as Dominique stated very recently about the Chinese government and cybercrime, Dominique said it could not just wave their hands and say this has nothing to do with them. Even if it is not directly linked to the state, they have responsibility to prosecute those gangs, those individuals, not to shelter them. And this is for all these reasons that many states, including France, Germany, the Netherlands, Finland, Japan, but also the European Union, for all these states and the European Union, they are clearly and explicitly stated not only the importance of this principle in the cyberspace, but also they are stated that due diligence has a binding nature, and they are truly calling, as Germany said recently, for its concrete operating application in the cyberspace. For them, the issue is therefore not whether or not states have a duty to not knowingly let their digital infrastructure be used to deal with ransomware, commit cybercrime, or launch malicious activities against another state, as it is obvious this obligation exists. The question for them is to what extent and how this obligation can be expected from states in the fight against cybercrime, ransomware, and other malicious activities. Let's turn now to the second round concerning the four cardinal points of due diligence in the fight against cybercrime. Indeed, it is well known that due diligence is an obligation of conduct, not of research, and that it requires states to be reasonably vigilant in regard to cybercrime and malicious activities within their territory. Assessing the reasonableness of this vigilance will therefore depend on the circumstances of each individual case and on a series of factors we can call vulnerability factors. To determine whether a state is reasonably vigilant with regard to cybercrime on its territory, it is therefore necessary to assess on a case-by-case basis each of these vulnerability factors, and in particular the four main ones, which are knowledge, capacity, risk, and damage. Knowledge. Knowledge is a key element without which there can be no due diligence. In the digital space, this knowledge can raise certain questions and be a cause of concern. Indeed, the speed and the stakes with which these actions are carried out there, but also their essential product nature, make knowledge difficult, especially when these actions are only transiting through the state's digital infrastructure. It should nonetheless be emphasized that the state exercising technical sovereignty does not mean that state must necessarily know or be aware of everything going on within its territory. The knowledge by its states of cybercriminal groups locating on its territory or launching cyber attacks against another state from its infrastructure can't be presumed. But conversely, it goes without saying that sovereign states can't reasonably ignore everything going on within their territory. A particularly critical issue in the digital space is therefore determining to what extent a sovereign state knows, must know, should have known, or should seek to know, in particular through the monitoring of action carried out on its territory or through notification. Concerning the relationship between knowledge and monitoring, it should be recalled that this close relationship between knowledge and monitoring or knowledge and surveillance has been widely discussed by international churches, particularly in the field of human rights. What transpires is that also states must exercise control over action carried out on their territory, particularly in the fight against cyber criminal groups. This does not mean that they are authorized to use such a pretext to develop mass surveillance and erode essential freedoms such as the right to privacy and confidentiality of communication. A second challenging issue is the relationship between knowledge and notification in the cyberspace. The question is to assess if and at what time a state is deemed to know when this knowledge is the result of being notified by another state. Recently, the United States has emphasized the fact that it was President Bill Biden saying of Vladimir Putin, I made it very clear to him that the United States expects when a ransomware operation is coming from its side, even though it is not sponsored by the state, we expect them to act if we give them enough information to act on initiative. In the fight against cybercrime and malicious cyber activities, notification can indeed constitute an interesting means of informing a state of action carried out on or transiting through its territory. The notification process can, however, raise certain questions and difficulties. For example, must those who notify, most often the victim states, have to provide certain elements in order for this notification to be accredited? Can one also consider, like President Biden, that a state can't not know when it has been informed by a sub-state? In its most recent report, adopted in May 2021, the United Nations Group of Experts on Cybersecurity, the UNGGE, showed more leniency on this question. The UNGGE, after emphasizing that the state affected by a malicious cyber activity should notify the state from which the activity is emanating, and that the notified state to acknowledge receipt of the notification, the report nevertheless considers, and I quote, that acknowledging the receipt of this notice does not indicate concurrence with the information content thereof. Let's turn now to capacity. States do not all have the same capacity in preventing the use of their digital infrastructure by cyber criminals. Differences in capacities between states are indeed particularly blatant in the digital space. And this situation may be a cause for concern, with some states fearing that due diligence may prove too burdensome or expose them too quickly to reaction of other states. These concerns, also legitimate, can however be overestimated. Why? Because capacity constitutes a widely admitted criterion in the interpretation and implementation of the due diligence obligation, and it is precisely to address this question. And several factors may be used in the cyberspace to assess states' capacity. For example, its level of economic growth, or its access to the required knowledge and technical capacities. However, the question is, could we go further and borrow the principle of common but differentiated responsibility from international and law to refer to these variability factors in the cyberspace? Duty will be differentiated insofar as states have different capacities, but also common because, as noted the United Nations Group of Experts on Cybersecurity, different levels of capacity for ICT security among states can increase vulnerability in an interconnected world. While the analogy with the notion of common but differentiated responsibility is interesting in the fight against cybercrime, it should nevertheless be recalled that whatever the inequalities in capacity states are sovereign in the cyberspace, and the monitoring of infrastructure and action carried out thereon is a natural attribute of any government. Moreover, we could add that another essential attribute of any government, whatever its capacities in the cyberspace, it is its legislative function. Any sovereign state can, at minimum, adopt legislation to punish cybercrime and other malicious cyber activities. Let's turn now to risk. It is generally accepted that the degree of diligence should be commensurate with the degree of risk of cross-border harm. According to precedents that now seem well established, the level of diligence required must be more rigorous for high-risk activities. Considering the spectacular growth of malicious acts in the digital space, in particular ransomware, targeting critical infrastructure, which appears that in some cases, digital activities constitute high-risk activities that require states to be more vigilant. Post-point damage. Due diligence does not necessarily cover all risk of damage. The damage must indeed reach a certain threshold of severity. Moreover, the combination of risk and damage is what makes it possible to assess the degree of diligence states has to have. Neither the threshold nor the degree of seriousness, however, of the damage receive particular attention in the report of the UN GGE, which referred in a reserved manner to the possibility of harm to the property, economy, and nationalism of states. On the other hand, what is really interesting as seen is the special attention which is now paid to critical infrastructure and other so-called essential or vital infrastructure, whose destruction or incapacity weakens the defense or national security of states. Due During the meeting on the date of La Geneva, President Biden drew a red line by giving Vladimir Putin a list of 16 critical US infrastructure sectors whose attack could lead to a response. While the US didn't go into more details concerning the type of response, the American statement sounds like a serious warning. If the Russian government can't or will not take action, its criminal actors residing in Russia will take action or reserve the right to take action on our own states. Concerning prevention, I will be very quick. Prosecution, notification, and cooperation. I would like to underline that due diligence requires states that are aware of cybercrime and malicious activity on their territory to take reasonable measures to put an end to these activities. In recent months, especially in connection with ransomware attacks, there have been many calls for due diligence. For example, in the midst of the COVID crisis pandemic and the attacks carried out on medical and hospital infrastructure, Denmark, Finland, Ireland, Norway, Sweden adopted a joint declaration in which they call on states to exercise due diligence and take appropriate measures against malicious cyber attacks carried out from their territory. And this declaration echoes the one made a few weeks before by the Iron Representative Joseph Borrell in the name of the European Union with regard to malicious cyber acts taking advantage of the coronavirus pandemic, in which the European Union and member states called upon each country accord to exercise due diligence and take the appropriate measures against players engaging in such activity. While due diligence undoubtedly includes a duty to act in order to put an end to activities infringing on the rights of suspects, there remains some important questions. Does due diligence involve a duty to inform or even to cooperate? Does due diligence entail a duty to prevent and to prosecute? In regard to the existence of a duty to prevent or even prosecute, it should be noted that the Planning Manual 3.0 rejects the idea according to which due diligence involves a preventive or representative aspect. I think that such a position is surprising because there is no structural or theoretical obstacle to such an aspect of due diligence. Moreover, from the Alabama case to the armed activities on the territory of the Congo, passing by the Corfu Channel case, international case laws is rich with examples in which the duty to prevent and prosecute as clearly and explicitly stated in regard to due diligence. And in light of these two elements, it is hard to see how and why the principle of due diligence should be in the cyberspace, and particularly in matter of cybercrime, be separated from these two aspects. We could even consider that the first measures states can take in the fight against cybercrime, whatever their capacity is to prevent and crack down on this act, by adopting legislation to prohibit them and by arming themselves with the necessary legislative arsenal to prosecute and sanction their perpetrators. As Canada recently pointed out during the first official Security Council meeting dedicated to peace and security in the cyberspace, and that's for Canada, criminal actors who engage in ransomware and other criminal activities live in and work for states. They use states' digital infrastructure to undertake their malicious activity. They are subject to the state's laws, while informed of potential malicious activity emanating from their territory. States have a responsibility to respond, enforcing their laws. In regard to notification and cooperation, some caution is in order. Saying that duty to inform is incumbent upon states that become aware of cybercrime if it plays on their territory vis-à-vis of potentially victim states would entail a duty to produce research. However, due diligence is by definition of an obligation of conduct, not of result. States therefore are the choice of means in trying to put an end to the non-risk to the other state's security. And while notification or even cooperation with other states is a good means, it is not the only one. If the state, for example, adopt other measures to prevent and to put an end to cybercrime, then notification may not be necessary. That being said, it appears that in many situations, notification might be the only way to prevent the damage from occurring or to mitigate its consequences. Given the nature of the digital space and the potential devastating nature of cyber attack, states may need to make extensive use of notification. Otherwise, it could be inferred that they have not taken the reasonable measures available to them to prevent, put an end to the cyber attack. Some states, such as Canada and the United States, seem to consider that states also have a duty to cooperate in the fight against cybercrime. According to Canada, once again, and I quote Canada, when informed of potential malicious activity emanating from their territory, states have a responsibility to respond, enforcing their law and cooperating with other states. However, while cooperation between states seems desirable in some contexts, whether it follows directly from the due diligence principle is, I think, uncertain. Moreover, given certain issues in cooperation inherent to cyberspace, in particular, regarding the refusal to disclose the state's technological expertise in cybersecurity to third parties, or the sometimes extremely complicated relation between states, cooperation could be much more difficult than notification. So I will end now my presentation in some words concerning attribution and state responsibility after the violation of due diligence. Violation of due diligence by the states in regard to cybercrime would constitute an unlawful international act engaging state responsibility. In this regard, it is interesting to note that while attribution constitutes one of the most difficult issues in the cyberspace, as it was under Nicolas Chagonas, this issue is partly circumvented while comparing responsibility is based on due diligence. Why? Indeed, why? Because common practice in matter of cybercrimes and ransomware shows that it is sometimes very difficult to consider a cyber attack launched from a state as an unlawful international act. Either because it is very difficult for technical, legal, or political reasons to attribute the cyber attack to the state, or because it is difficult to precisely determine the rule that was violated, or for both reasons at the same time. So now, using due diligence in the digital space makes it possible to get around more of these issues. Establishing that a state has violated due diligence does not, in fact, necessarily imply blaming the cyber attack on that state using the usual mechanism of attribution. It is, in fact, relatively immaterial whether the act in question was committed by a state organ, an agent acting intravirus or outside its function, a proxy, an intermediary, a group of patriot hackers, terrorists, the mafia, cyber criminals, or again, even a company keen on gaining competitive advantage. The only thing that matters with regard to the principle of due diligence is to know if the elements constituting this violation are present, no matter who is the author of the attack. The question is, did the state know or should it have known that its infrastructure was being used to launch a cyber attack causing serious damage to another state? Did the state forego its duty to take the reasonable measures available to prevent the damage? If the answer is yes, the state could be held responsible regardless of the perpetrator. As Japan recently emphasized before the UN Security Council, and I quote Japan, we recognize the difficulty of attributing cyber operations to states. The due diligence obligation may provide grounds for invoking the responsibility of the state from the territory of which a cyber operation not attributed to any state originated. Of course, this does not mean that the many technical difficulties pertaining to the source and modus operandi of cyber attack miraculously disappear. It demonstrates the existence of a breach in the due diligence. Technical evidence is necessary, in particular that allowing to demonstrate that the cyber attack did indeed emanate from the territory of the state in question, and that the latter had aware or was aware of the situation, had the reasonable means to put an end to it, and did nothing about it. These technical and legal issues combined with other difficulties interesting to the very nature of due diligence, providing such a breach in due diligence in cyber space extremely difficult. So to conclude this presentation, I would like to underline the fact that the principle of due diligence maintains the primary responsibility of states in regard to action carried out on their territory, both by public bodies and private sector players. It sets a reasonable set of behavior standard for states in preventing and cracking down on cybercrime within their territory, while making it possible to get around the delicate issue of attribution. While this principle is of course not only the tools states use to fight the scourge of ransomware attack, it contributes to fostering responsible behavior among states, and as such is a precious tool in the fight against cybercrime and malicious cyber activities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Karim, for this excellent presentation. So we open the floor for questions. Please raise your hand. Go ahead. Wait a second.
Should I go there?
Just
wait. No?
No, it's fine.
Okay, so okay, so I'm sorry for your presentation. It was okay.
Yes. So thanks a lot for your presentation. I think it was super clear. And I was thinking, and you you mentioned this, but I would like to ask you to elaborate on how due diligence can be used as an excuse to curtail human rights. I mean, as the states have to take the necessary measures to fight cybercrime, we know that, for example, there is a big debate nowadays in the European Union about data retention, and I think particularly in France. So states say, I need to use data retention in order to fight cybercrime, and in any kind of crime, to be honest. And then they say, I really need this tool to fight cybercrime. But on the other hand, we may find attention with data protection, freedom of expression, and so on. And we are seeing this with the decisions of the Court of Justice of the European Union and I think Conseil d'État in France. So if you could elaborate a little bit on this possible tension.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, on this question. Yes, it's a very tough question because this was talking about by many states taking obligations to the principle that we have to be aware that the righteousness are introduce this due diligence principle in order to violate human rights, beginning with the right to privacy. But not only in the righteous states, also we have this problem with Western states, as you see, for example, the human rights justice. But the first thing I have to say is it has always been underlined in the history of due diligence that due diligence is behind the side of human rights. And due diligence can't be the excuse of violating all the rules of international law. It is not a superior law of international law. So, and in all declaration, it is underlined that due diligence can't be an excuse. So you are right when saying yes, that if somebody says, I want to exercise my due diligence obligation, and to exercise my due diligence obligation, I have to do this and this. You know that we have a very important restrictions in Europe concerning these issues and the application of the best of system proportionality. And I think this is a key issue if you want to find the right balance between, I would like to say, security and the need to protect human rights. There is not an opposition between security and human rights at hand to hand, and the balance will be done by the church as the European Union, given by the test of resistance proportionality. It does not mean that it is also the issue, because in many other parts of the world, this test is not met, but it's not a reason, I think, to exclude due diligence from the obligation to state in the cyberspace. That is a risk.
Thank you for your presentation. When I was listening to you talking about the vertical integration of intervention that includes prevention, I don't have that. Prevention, prosecution, prosecution, notification, and cooperation. Well, that reminds me some connections with the compliance regulation systems. So I'd like to ask that what do you think in the development of cooperation agreements against cybercrime, as well as the consolidation of intention to legally prevent cybercrime, contemplated that a circumstance that avoid or exclude the responsibility of the state in case that, despite of their mistake, fails to prevent the commission of cybercrime from its solution?
I'm not sure that I get the question.
Yeah, so could the development of integral prevention systems exclude the responsibility of states in case that despite of all the efforts, all the legal efforts, a state fails to prevent the commission of cybercrime from its origin?
What do you mean by integral systems of cybercrime prevention?
Yes, she spoke about prevention, prosecution, notification, and cooperation. And I'm talking about that it is quite similar to the system, the regulation, compliance regulation systems states are issuing recently, such as, for example, the SOX in the United States. What? The SOX, yeah, well, it's a regulation in the United States, yeah, compliance systems. Perhaps the question is not applicable for this. Well, I'm just talking about the connection between the due diligence and integral prevention of cybercrime as a circumstance to exclude the responsibility of states in case that, despite all the efforts made by the states to prevent cybercrime, despite of all of them, at the end, cybercrime takes place.
Yes, I understand. Yes, it can, because as I said, due diligence is not an obligation to say, it's an obligation due diligence is an obligation of conduct, not of result. So in some cases, steps, I would say, taken also reasonable steps, measures in order to prevent the crime, but failed. And so this is, there is an exclusion from responsibility because all the reasonable measures was taken. But it's a fact that due diligence exists in the cyberspace. It can be applied in the fight against cybercrime. You not exclude the responsibilities that they have, for example, under the cybercrime convention. So it's complementary. So some states are, part of the cybercrime convention, and then there are some obligation under this convention, and they can use, it's impossible for them to use the privileges in order to exclude their obligation of the convention. I don't know if it was.
Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. My question relates to any existing mechanisms which can be used as an inspiration to create due diligence mechanisms for the cyberspace. And in particular, I'm thinking about the draft articles on prevention of transboundary harm for public activities, which IOC adopted in 2001. Can you think of applying to some extent those articles to come up perhaps with a more detailed guidance on due diligence for states? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes. Of course, because you know what is interesting with work of the IC in this respect.
Can you turn off one mic on the table, otherwise?
So what is interesting, concerning the work on the IAC concerning the prevention of transboundary harm from other activities is that, in fact, the IAC does not exclude the fact that it was not reserved for environmental protection of the environment. And the IAC said that all activities can be included in this work, and especially new technology. So, and so the work of the IAC on this question of due diligence is extremely important and interesting, I think. Not only concerning, the question of the damage, the question of the risk. So yes, in one of my work, I use a lot the IOC commission law on this issue in order to understand how to operationalize due diligence into cyberspace, and I think it is perfectly adapted.
Okay. Any other question? We have like 10 minutes, but no more. If not,
maybe I'm not visible now. I actually have a question.
I'm so sorry.
Who is this?
This is Leon online.
Hi, Leon. We're trying to see you.
We will see you.
Hi, Leon.
Hello. Okay, if you can see me, I'll
yeah, go ahead.
So many thanks for this most interesting presentation. I would also like to say that I believe you deserve much credit for your work on due diligence, which you already developed very early on in international legal discussion. So I have a question on institutional safeguard measures which are necessary for efficient exercise of due diligence. So, for example, when a cyber operation occurs and due diligence needs to be exercised, for example, to cooperate or to prosecute, this actually requires that already some institutional safeguard measures are in place. So, for example, regarding cooperation, that points of contact, national points of contact are in place. With regard to prosecution, that the cybercrime laws, potentially also procedural laws are in place. And my question is, would you argue that due diligence can already be violated if the state does not have such measures in place, or only when in case a cyber operation occurs and then requirement for a violation of due diligence or system state responsibility is only triggered, already triggered when the state does not have such safeguard measures. And I'm thinking the underlying reasoning is that also, for example, in the ILC draft prevention articles, a requirement of due diligence is to set up legislative measures and administrative measures, etc. In the international legal discourse, from what I understand so far, it's very contentious whether due diligence can already be violated without harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, very good. Thank you very much for this question. To my knowledge, and of course it is a hard question, but if you look at the jurisprudence and international case, the violation of due diligence occur when the damage occurs. And then we go back in order to see and to assess whether states have enacted reasonable measures and the legislative apparatus. But to my knowledge, till now, due diligence violations occur only when the harm, not a small harm, a significant harm occur. So, the absence of legal measures to prevent the harm are only a way to prove the violation of the due diligence, but only the result.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. But we have to keep on our schedule, so we will have a break. We will take a break right now. Half an hour, please. Be on time for the next presentation, which will be panel 1. Okay. Thanks very much.
Excuse me, the break is downstairs in the second courtyard. It's not that difficult to get there. You just take the stairs, go downstairs, and you get. You have
Just follow. It's better if they follow you.
Okay, follow us.
¿Qué tal? ¿Todo bien?
No, vamos pues sobre la marcha a ver si.
Sobre la marcha, bueno.
Vamos a ver si conseguimos con este micrófono más potente que ya mejor la sala.
Bueno.
Venga, vamos.
Está bien, está bien. Mira, si ahora estoy en el Ministerio de Exteriores y a veces llego, digo, ¿cuál es la primera vez que hoy de chicos de españoles supervisemos? Sí, bueno.
Muy bien.
Did you have a USB on? No? You sent me the
I think you
half an hour ago. Okay. That's right. Let me ask to Antonio, and then we will solve it. Because you are going to talk in the first place. Let me talk to Antonio. Which one is other? Oh.
Como que lo que aprendí básicamente es, hay un montón de problemas, no podemos hacer nada, pero no hay nada de que sea obligatorio, y pues no tenemos que probablemente no se demande, y digo, ¿qué cuál es el aquí? Porque me lo pongo por fuera.
¿Tiene ya otro?
Pues aquí sí, de la llama de Dios,
Sí, déjame dar.
Vale.
quiero ver es el micrófono, si se pone mejor. Voy a conectar.
Descárgale el PDF tu.
You will be working out for a fee. You might work for a fee. ¿Lo has enviado a mi mamá, no? Sí, llega a usted. Ya le va a mandar, yo le he mandado, digo, si yo le voy a mandar el tema, y me va a un poco de otro. Go, pero Santiago, go, pero sí, es que no va a poner porque no lo cambian la cuenta. Ya, un sobre. Claro, please, come closer. Sorry, this is just we wanted to just estuvo aquí y era aquí y así es que para poder pasar la casita que voy a pasar y estamos en
Sí, te lo acabo de enviar. Sí. It's going to be okay.
So, buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon, everyone. Here, those attending online. My name is Pablo Martín Rodríguez, and I am professor of National and Human Law at the University of Granada. I have to say I'm really very pleased with chairing this first panel of the conference on the challenge of global cybersecurity. We've learned already that cyberspace, if there is such a thing as opposed to physical space, poses the first rank challenge to international law, which has been built on territorial base. Right? Well, the subject of this panel one puts us in front of the core of the conundrum. Because it deals with, I would say, the ultimate issue of international law, which is the use of force and the reaction to that is self-defense and countermeasures. The international regulation on the use of force is probably going through a transformation in the 21st century. Some days ago, we have been remembering
how 9/11 changed for good the legal landscape of the use of force in international matters and put in there terrorism and terrorist state agent state. So the start of the nation is for sure challenging for international law as private acts as well. So then it's really a crucial matter we are going to discuss here. And in order to delve into this conundrum, we have two stimulating speakers, one on set and one online, but it should be a conference about cybersecurity. So please, let me introduce them briefly before I leave them to. Here, to my right, is Professor Callengue, who is a senior fellow in international economic law and director of the Investment Treaty Forum at the British Institute of International and Public Law in London. He's also a member of the New York State Bar and has practiced law extensively before moving to academia. He's currently engaged in a number of law reform and capacity building projects within the United Nations, other governmental agencies, and also academic institutions. He's authored a number of articles and monographs, primarily in the area of international dispute settlement. He's a matter as an arbitrator in several institutions. We will talk about responding to public and private cyber attacks, self-defense, and countermeasures. And online, we will have our second speaker, which is Constantinos Kouroufatos. He's a postgraduate in public international law and a practicing attorney in Athens. He is interested in technology law, regulation of cyberspace and international law, and the intersection of international law and international norms to govern cyberspace. He's currently about to finish his second master's degree in public international law from the University of Callengue. He will enlighten us with the intriguing title of Cyber Operation as Threat Force, a welcome addition or speaking head. So, without much further ado, which you all know is here, let me introduce or give the floor to Professor Kouroufatos.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, for your hospitality and for your determination to make this event happen in this format, in this hybrid format. My background is primarily in international dispute resolution and international investment law. And perhaps I am one of those who will learn a lot during this conference, perhaps more than some other speakers on these panels. And the reason I picked this topic is because we are doing a project which is funded by the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, which examines threats, new security threats, and future of economic globalization. And there's no doubt that cyber threats, cyber attacks are among the most dangerous and the newest forms of threats in the context of globalization which we currently see. And in order to conceptualize how to approach cyber attacks from the point of view of international law, from the point of view of domestic and comparative law, I decided to separate cyber attacks into two models, which are hypothetical models. None of them is a pure model, and these are public and private cyber attacks. So first, I will introduce the conceptual framework, and then I will go into detail and discuss various aspects related to each type of cyber attacks, or each model of cyber attacks. So when it comes to private cyber attacks, they're usually committed by non-state actors, and those who perpetrate cyber attacks, private cyber attacks, they are driven by financial or ideological motivation. And private cyber attacks usually do not pursue political goals. However, you can think of terrorism, terrorist attacks, committed by private groups which may have political goals or ideological goals. And the severity of cyber attacks varies from small to severe. However, if you compare private cyber attacks to public cyber attacks, they're usually less severe and much more numerous. When it comes to public cyber attacks, I divided them into two categories. The first category is hybrid cyber attacks, and the second is direct cyber attacks, direct public cyber attacks. Hybrid cyber attacks involve non-state actors and state actors, which presents significant problems from the point of view of international law, as our two keynote speakers demonstrated to us today. This relates to attribution, this relates to the duty of due diligence. And usually hybrid cyber attacks are driven by a mix of financial, ideological, and political motivations. And the targets of hybrid cyber attacks vary from large targets with severe impacts to smaller cyber attacks, or perhaps these are not necessarily cyber attacks, but just cyber offenses which could be used in the future for full-scale cyber attacks. So these are hybrid cyber attacks, which involve cooperation of non-state and state actors. When it comes to direct cyber attacks, here the issue of attribution is more clear because states are involved, and states are mainly politically motivated, and they want to cause damage or gain access to sensitive information. As I already mentioned, these are hypothetical models. So, of course, there are issues with attribution of direct cyber attacks to states, but in this hypothetical model, states are behind them and they do not involve private actors. And the effect of these cyber attacks on security, on national security, is usually much more severe than the effect of private cyber attacks. And most often they target state institutions, state entities, however they may also